am delighted to be here. Thank you for having me. As Gavin mentioned, I have worked in startups, in financial services, and now healthcare. And a little bit about my personal story is that I had started to feel dead inside at work. And I decided to make a change. And the express purpose, no pun intended, of my change was to go towards something that I felt was contributing to a common good. So, I was in a super stable position and happy otherwise, but I really felt like I wanted to do something to contribute to the common good. And that's why I decided to join healthcare, and that's how I got to Express Scripts.
Yeah. And I'm Danielle. My story is a little bit different. So I've been in technology for almost 20 years now, which is scary to say out loud. But I've worked at a variety of different places. I worked in healthcare early in my career, but in an academic setting. And then I went on to other parts of technology, lots of B2B work and a little bit of NASA. But I came here because Express Scripts is what's known as a pharmacy benefit manager. So they, for lack of a better word, are kind of the middleman in between you and your prescription, so prescription insurance of sorts, but they help to negotiate prices. And we like to say we keep medication safer and more affordable because we have all of this data to do that. And that's one of the reasons that drew me here, is this idea that I can work in a place that has data on about a third of the United States at any point in time. I mean, let's just take a moment and let that soak in, like a third of the United States. And we can analyze that data to make healthcare better. And so that's what brought me. I just was very excited by all of that.
The power of data. So just a couple things more about Express Scripts, because I think it's important to kind of understand the company and the conversation that we're going to have tonight, just to frame what we're going to talk about. Express Scripts is what we like to call the largest company that you probably never heard of. It's a Fortune 25, and their express business is to provide these PBM services, and in addition to that, to provide home delivery of medications. So a lot of what we do is in our design work, and some of the things that you're going to see tonight is to allow people to get their medications and to develop the software that you use to actually process those transactions and to make that happen. So that is a core key to our business, and one of the things that Express Scripts has it's one of the ways that they have decided to embrace technology is to transform these products and to do something better. And again, that's kind of why we're there. Yeah. So go ahead.
And to be just another thing we wanted to mention is that tonight is about our opinions and our experience. Healthcare is a very varied and wide place, but we're just going to talk about what's true for us.
Yep. Yeah. Let's start with just a show of hands, because we want to understand what your interest is in this conversation, and when we're having this discussion, we want to frame that towards what interests you. So a show of hands, who is working in healthcare? And I know a lot of hands are going to go up because we have a lot of coworkers. Thank you. Okay, most of the hands that went up were coworkers. Is anyone here thinking of working in healthcare? Okay, cool. And anybody just want to fix healthcare? I mean, I don't know anybody who wouldn't raise their hand unless you just are so happy with the situation. That's awesome. Used to work in healthcare, okay. Any other categories that we missed?
Just raise your hand.
Yeah. Just raise both hands and have a confused look on your face. Okay, well that helps. So we want to name the dragon because the idea of healthcare and a discussion on healthcare is incredibly immense. And what we are going to talk about today is not healthcare innovation. There are so many things that are going on right now that are amazing and that don't really speak to the conversation that we're going to frame today. I mean, medical devices and medical technologies, there are a lot of things going on. That's not what we're essentially talking about. There are a lot of things that are really exciting and unique about DNA research and genetics and looking at someone's data and being able to produce products around an individual. Those things we want to acknowledge, but that's not what we're going to talk about today. And Lainey asked me earlier, are we going to talk about telemedicine? While that's relevant to what we're doing, that's not the focus of our conversation. Our conversation is about healthcare as an institution. some of the work that we're doing with Express Scripts plays into that, but the conversation is broader. So framing that, naming that dragon, we're talking about healthcare as an institution and primarily healthcare in the United States. So we're not talking about healthcare worldwide. So with that defined and that dragon named, we wanted to do a little bit more of interactivity to get everyone's understanding as to why you think we're broken. What do you think is broken?
If you can just, shout
it out.
Like in what ways do you feel like our system of healthcare in this country is broken?
The insurance companies.
Insurance companies?
Uh-huh.
Say again?
It wasn't designed.
It wasn't designed. Yeah.
Inefficiency. Pharma bros.
Farmer Bros.
Lack of collaboration between systems or organizations.
Yep, all awesome points.
People are sick and companies don't care.
Yep. Takes too long.
Takes too long.
Too hard to deal with.
No
Costs are
transparency.
really
Sorry, what?
No transparency of cost difference between providers.
Yeah.
Is that exactly what you said too?
I said the costs are okay in the general.
Okay.
Awesome.
Anything else?
Primarily focused on acute care,
Yeah.
for-profit industry.
Yep.
We're not addressing wellness,
Yep.
Doctor training.
symptoms, not causes.
Say again?
Symptoms, not causes.
Symptoms, not causes. Yeah.
Yep, not behind it.
I don't think the patient is the center of healthcare.
Yeah.
It's the business part.
Yep. Okay.
It's attainable to a lot of people.
Yep. Awesome. All part of the conversation, hopefully.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about some of these points through the context of the conversation, but let's definitely address some of those and have that discussion if we don't cover something that you really want to talk about in the question session, because I think we'll have around about 30 minutes. And we really wanted to use this presentation to spark that dialogue and then to carry it into the question. So just keep that in mind. If it's something that you shouted out that is really pressing and on your mind doesn't come up, then we'll talk about it later. Does anyone know what this is, or might have a guess as to what it could be? It's the light at the end of the tunnel. The conversation that we're going to have and that we're going to enter into right now is painful, and we're going to talk about what's broken for a while, and it hurts to talk about that. So I just want you to remember when you start to feel sad through this conversation that white light is there. Don't actually go into the light, but know that it's there and that we will come out at the other end and there will be hope and inspiration and continued tacos and beer. All right, so just focus on this white light when your soul feels sad. Okay, so deconstructing the holdout. So in the kind of basis and the setup for the conversation, we talk about healthcare in and of itself, again, that big industry as the last technical holdout. And what we wanted to start with was kind of the why and deconstruct the why and the what and talk about why now is the time for change. The number one reason is what we've labeled the hand over fist principle. And that is, I think someone shouted it out, that you make money in spite of yourself. And because I have a background in financial services, this isn't something that was totally unknown to me. I feel like financial services has had the same problem for its lifetime. And if you think about it, I mean, why change? If you're making money and you're meeting your objectives and your clients are happy, why change?
And similar, like I've worked with some of you in a B2B context, and we had a similar story where these companies, these large enterprises, make specialized IT systems that used to be really complicated and hard to use, and they required 40 hours of training, and that was fine. Nobody cared because they were still making money. But we saw, like, the reason why I went to some of these companies was that was starting to change. There was disruption in that industry, and they needed to think about their user when they design their products.
Yep. So disruption is essentially the catalyst for the change when you have the hand over fist principle at play, right? So just think about that. Some of the other whys, the trap of the institution itself if we are all beholden to this institution, then essentially it's a captive audience, right? I mean, we are required to buy into these industries, and that in and of itself is the trap. The mystique of the expert, and I feel like, again, that's one that creeps into the financial services territory, but everybody knows the phrase, the doctor knows best. And that idea that someone is working on your behalf who knows better than you is one of the things that we unpack as we start to look at some of the problems and start to look at improvements.
And related to that, but slightly different when it comes to healthcare, is this idea of regulations. We have mystical experts within our company that know the healthcare regulations through and through. If I were to say healthcare is a heavily regulated industry, that would be like the understatement of the century. And we get in this mode of, oh, this person knows the regulations, they know the compliance law, they know the different ins and outs of this, so let's not challenge them. But maybe we should be. Instead of hiding behind regulations, we should actually be exploring how we can still work with them, work around them, or maybe change them.
Right. So now we're going to focus on the what. We broke these into 3 categories because I think they're pretty large chunks and they kind of interrelate. So to unpack it kind of efficiently, we've chunked them as technology, culture, and talent. So let's start by looking at, I knew that was going to happen, the technology portion. Scale and distribution, I mean, essentially those are going hand in hand, but if all of us are in this institution, whether we like it or not, this problem resolves down to every single individual. Every person in this country, regardless of age, they're all users of the system. And the idea that the connections go into every single doctor's office in this country, essentially makes the problem immense, tangled, and incredibly difficult. So on top of that, or as a result, we've got an integration problem. When we want to look at integration, it seems impossible and incredibly difficult, and replatforming as an effort behind that, in addition, seems an impossibility. So there are all of these intricate and related issues that essentially affect every one of us, and it's flat out hard.
We're entering in a situation where UX, user experience, is thought of as a nice to have. Someone mentioned that the patient is not the center of healthcare. Literally, user experience was, before we started, we'll talk about how we changed that, was about like what color should it be, what font should we use, not a deep consideration of user needs. And that's related for all the reasons we mentioned before, experts, regulations. One regulation in particular that comes into play in our culture is HIPAA. It's a very good law. I mean, it's to protect our health information. But that became part of the culture to keep us from migrating to new technology, because the old technology was HIPAA compliant, and to change the way we do things. The idea that you could do user research was just unthinkable in the world where HIPAA was the leading element of the culture. So when I was hired at Express Scripts 2 years ago, somebody forgot to tell legal. I literally walked in my first week and got introduced to our chief compliance officer, and she was like, wait, you do what? You ask people about their medication? We can't do that. It's like, well, we are, because I quit my old job and I'm here. So,
So no turning back.
No turning back. So this is a real culture that exists in different healthcare institutions.
Yeah. So from a talent perspective, I mean, kind of piggybacking off what Danielle said, this idea when you come in to affect change, that the first answer is we can't do that. And you have to kind of take a step back and justify the why. It essentially challenges the status quo. And the bar is set pretty low. And having to reset the bar is painful and terrifying. So that is one of the major struggles that I think we've both faced, is first of all identifying what that status quo is, and then challenging it and raising the bar and raising the idea of the status quo. One of the other things related to that is this notion of transformation itself, and the idea that there are things that are old and need to be replaced inside of these constructs, and sometimes that means that people's roles change. A lot of these disciplines that Danielle and I have either started with or are trying to bring up are very new to the organization that we're working with, and in some certain cases, there's some terror around that, and what it means to have this notion of a second life. Like, how do you actually reinvent yourself inside of an industry that's rapidly changing? And I think that's a question that we're seeing in a lot of industries that are in deep transformation right now. Finally, the rock star's dilemma.
Yeah.
And that essentially it just makes it hard to attract the right talent.
And we try to be really honest with people when we're recruiting them, and to tell them about these things, but it's hard to understand until you get in it. So that's one thing I would like you guys to walk away from this with, is that if you are a rock star in your current organization, the way you work inside of a healthcare org is different. The way you think about success is different. I came from technology. It was the government, but it was still a technology, and I went to other technology companies. Most of my friends work in technology. Healthcare is not that. Like, healthcare, or this healthcare organization did not realize that Agile is a new thing. It's not like the way they grew up building and working. All of us, or all of the people I know, kind of realized a long time ago that software ate the world, every company is a technology company. That's not the way healthcare is. You kind of walk into this different environment. We're changing and modernizing, but you're not in Kansas anymore.
So why now? Why this change? I mean, the first point is pretty obvious, and Danielle, I think you referenced this at the very beginning. It's a competitive space now. And I do believe the idea of competition and the fear that competition brings trumps the hand over fist principle any day. So you're starting to see companies that never cared to be in this space before enter this space and present some really compelling ideas. And it stresses the existing organization. There's also this notion of critical mass. I think a lot of what came out in the open discussion as to what's broken speaks to that critical mass. I mean, shit is broken. It's broken a lot and everywhere. And it has to be fixed because essentially our health does rely on it, and we have no choice but to fix it. So the critical mass issue. I also think the age of reputation. No longer can companies get away with being assholes, and people are holding companies accountable for what they are delivering and what they're doing. So the age of reputation has come into play for this. And I think consumer empowerment is a part of that, right? People are activated to say what they think and to be vocal in multiple channels about what they want and what they believe.
Yeah, and industry is also not deaf to the ramifications of what that means. So more and more people speak out, the more and more Washington talks about, making new regulations and trying to almost regulate an experience. And in response to that, we are trying to change and modernize. The political environment is something that is real, that is spawning change. And then behind this, at least we think behind all this, is this idea that it's about equality. Healthcare is about making it accessible and attainable for people, no matter their ability or whether or not they can understand the complicated jargon we use, just to bring it up, bring it into their reach.
Okay, so the light is starting to peep through the tunnel. So let's talk now about actually changing it. So one of the things that we wanted to be clear about, because I know that there are multiple disciplines represented in the room, the disciplines that we're specifically focusing on are these. UX design is one of those givens. UX engineering is one that I believe is somewhat unique to our team and what we're doing, and we've got some of the engineers in the room today. We're also talking about content, so content delivery, as well as the the notion of content engineering, which we classify as a segment of UX engineering. So the tools and the systems that actually work to deliver the content to the consumer in multiple formats and through multiple mechanisms.
And when we talk about experience research at Express Scripts, we mean specifically UX research, which is more traditional usability testing, user experience research. Also includes Net Promoter Score, NPS program management, and that's relatively unique to be inside of an experience team, and as well as the web feedback process and journey mapping, all live within our UX research discipline. My organization is also responsible for accessibility across the enterprise, and before some folks in the audience kind of protest to that, we are the SMEs, and we do research specifically around making our experiences more accessible. And we also have the web analytics and kind of web data science functionality within our experience team. And this grouping of disciplines within UX is a little bit different, but it works really well for our organization.
So with that understanding, that these are the disciplines that we're talking about, we have kind of discussed the idea of the foundations of change as the battle royales that some of these disciplines have actually brought into the organization. So the first one that I would call out, which is slightly outside of our scope, is the idea of product versus program or project. One of the things that was pretty obvious when we first walked in the door was that we didn't really have any products defined. Everything was a project or a point in time or a program that was going to be sold. And I believe that a lot of these disciplines and kind of the proof through the work has caused us to articulate what our products actually are. And as we're evolving Agile and transforming towards Agile, we've gotten really much cleaner about distinguishing that and understanding that products have to be maintained. So that's one of the biggest, I think, revelations of going into this new organization and in healthcare itself. One of the other things that I would offer is that the UX portion and the idea of all of these disciplines working together to deliver user-centered design as a practice into the organization has started to challenge the notion of the expert. One of the things that, again, we face when we first walk in is this idea that the expert's opinion trumps anything else. And for me, it was simply because we didn't have proof otherwise, right? With the user-centered design as a practice and essentially adopting a model of testing, iterating, and testing again, you have a proof point. So it's something that I believe has transformed the way that we've thought of things as an organization, and essentially it is the proof, it's the belief that comes with the data.
Yeah, and the third battle royale is that the proof versus guess. In the experience space specifically, there's a lot of guessing going on about what the patient wanted, what the member wanted, how they wanted to interact with something, but we brought data to the party. And the one thing that we'll talk about later is that data has been transformational in this space. So there's other parts of the business that ingested different things, like the rate of claims, like a lot of the prescription level information, but this idea that you could apply that same level of rigor to a person, to a user, and kind of measure those experiences, that was new, and this discipline is bringing about change because of that idea in the organization.
Yeah, one final thought that I would offer regarding the transformation is around the idea of design thinking and the active act of design thinking, of doing design thinking, of that practice. I feel like it has improved the notion of engagement, collaboration, and innovation across the entire company. And essentially it's because there is this different way of doing things that has that proof now behind it. So that's one of the points that for me has been really incredible to witness. In all of the companies that I've worked at prior to this, it was kind of just like a known thing, and it wasn't seen as an active agent of change. And for me, that's something that I have found especially fulfilling in working with this company and seeing design thinking make these sweeping, broad changes that are changing the world. Okay, so what are we doing to change, and how are we bringing about the change itself? The first thing that has been unique in my own experience, and I am interested to hear if this is something that resonates with you guys, or if you have alternate experiences that you would offer in our kind of conversation, is that the whole digital experience team is on the hip of technology. In my experience past, I've either been attached to a software engineering organization or a product organization, or attached to the hip to marketing, which, no offense to marketers, but that feels like pain to a designer. And
a researcher.
Right. I didn't want to drag you down that hole, but you went anyway.
I did.
We are attached in our org to the CTO. And it has been incredible because we are essentially looking at design architecture at the same time we're looking at platforming across the entire company. So what we're able to do is to ensure that our code and that our capabilities are able to meet the expectations of what we want to produce as design. And that has made all the difference.
Yeah, and I mean, specifically, that's made a difference in our scalability and our ability to quickly change things when we need to, and accessibility. So baking accessibility into our architecture across the organization has been really impactful to be on that team.
Yeah, and one anecdote I would share, when we first became a part of the CTO, it felt a little strange, and we were all kind of like, this is a little weird. But when we all sat down at the leadership level and planned out our mission and started to talk about the capabilities that we would be able to envision and bring to life together, I started to change my way of thinking, and I realized this is actually our secret sauce. This is something that almost no one is doing, and we can make this a groundbreaking story, because I do believe that is making the difference for us and has allowed us to accelerate our work at a pace that I've never experienced in my career. Everybody join the CTO. Designers unite with architecture. The other thing that we are starting to look at, and that I think is part of our charge for 2018, is this idea of the revolution of plain language and in what I labeled interpretive advocacy. I think this is something that is unique to healthcare itself, because there is this high demand for content that makes sense. And it's not like nobody has a demand for content that makes sense. Everyone has a demand for it. But in this particular industry, content that doesn't make sense keeps people from getting the things that they need. And ultimately, that impacts health and health outcomes. So this kind of pivot in our group is towards this idea that we are the advocate for these customers. It is our charge to interpret for them and to make the content that they read understandable. And everyone who has worked in design for any amount of time knows that the best design will fail if your content isn't meaningful and doesn't make sense. Directions to the light at the end of the tunnel. So continuing on, just one other point, design language for healthcare based on inclusion. Again, this idea of accessibility, we talk about accessibility, but accessibility is just a label. What we are really talking about is equality and allowing our products to be used by all. And I feel like when you strip the word accessibility away from that, it becomes more of a noble mission that is less philosophical and more human. So our design language, our design system, is built on this principle that it's accessible at its core. And we're going to talk a little bit about design language in a second.
Yeah, but related to this idea of going beyond like the bare minimum, one thing we're trying to do now is kind of do research, do testing, do analytics with this idea of like, what are we trying to achieve beyond like accessibility? Like accessibility is a great example. Instead of like going through the W3C checklist saying we've done all these things, we've moved beyond that, and we're now starting to do active user testing with blind users, with users with different, who might use a screen reader and different abilities, to see how we can make their experience actually better, not just possible.
Right.
And we're doing that in various contexts for various different groups. One thing that I'll hit on again and again, because this is my thing, is the revolution of data. Like Christina mentioned, we're part of the CTO. That has been really helpful in kind of up-leveling our analytics game very quickly. So when we started, and there's folks afterwards, other people can talk about this too, but when we started, it was scattered. Our ability to just know what was going on in the digital sphere was really spotty. But now we have an architecture, we are rolling it out, we have a lot more data, and we can roll it to touch all of these things and inform our decisions in a very meaningful way.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what we mean by design language. And this is the definition that Danielle and I did an arm wrestling match over, several arm wrestling matches over.
So no one's allowed to comment on it.
The way we describe it, as we agreed, is the building blocks of our digital product experiences made up of visual, verbal, and interactive elements. So what we're really talking about is layouts and templates, obviously. Elements of visual and content style, I think those things are very known. Navigation and experiential patterns, and a lot of what we're trying to develop is this notion of patterns for comprehension. So what are the specific patterns and the ways that we communicate through our interactive elements that actually enhance comprehension? That's something I personally have never looked at before. Functional components, I think everybody kind of understands what that is, but beyond that, taking those things and creating healthcare patterns that are specific to our industry, but healthcare at large. So what are the things that we can not only use internally, but more broadly share with the healthcare community to start that conversation and to ensure that we all have the same benchmarks of quality for success, for comprehension. Native specific specifications and all the code that goes with it. So it's like everything in a bag of chips, and the bag of chips is the code. And again, I think that speaks to just the unique construction of our team. And it may be that more teams are moving forward with this pattern where they actually deliver the code and the componentry to enable the build of the front end. But it's definitely something that's unique in our org.
Yeah, and by us being on the same team, working really closely together, all these iterations are informed by user feedback, and we want to generate the right empathy and emotions, and we put that in front of people and get that feedback. We put it out there and see what the analytics are, and it's not a long process to get that iteration built in. And because we are, again, part of the CTO, we do have this entire kind of end-to-end ability to deliver our design language.
Yeah.
I've been in organizations where design is its own thing, where it's kind of reports straight up. There's a VP of design, and that's awesome for more mature situations. But what we found early on is that we were kind of knocking on the door, like, hey, technology, pay attention to us. Hey, architects, don't forget about us. But now we're like all part of the table, all part of the same conversation, and we see this through the delivery of our design language.
Yep. So all of these things, this comprehensive design language has allowed us to reimagine our existing products. So this is the entry point to our core Express Scripts product with some pre-login capabilities that we're not going to look at. It's allowed us to set up entire new companies. InsideRx is one that we launched last year, and we put those capabilities and the entire company up at what I would call an unreasonable speed. Carla's laughing because she was there. And it's also allowed us to start to set up these native apps across our properties. This is one for a company that we own called Accredo. And Accredo helps very sick people get their medication. So creating these tools, using this design language, we're able to transform the things that are there today, regardless of whether it's legacy stack, and build all new capabilities as well as set up new companies. So we're kind of hitting on a lot of different dimensions there. And this is the kind of, this is not a design language. So this is the kind of stuff that we're unpacking. These are the types of things that we're bringing consistency, quality, and attention to. So, these are just some of the layers of the onion. And
I mean, if you think about some of the problems we talk about in the healthcare as an institution, I mean, it's just an outgrowth of that. If everything's a project, if everyone's kind of siloed, if UX is an afterthought, then it kind of happens where you have multiple colors of orange on the same page. And that seems like a trivial thing, but it really carries through in confusion and like different issues for your users.
Yeah. So removing the friction. Okay, our freedom. So we wanted to talk a little bit about, this is not a recruiting event, but we wanted you guys to understand what our freedoms have been working in this space, because for me, it's become part of my personal story. So the first thing is the idea of greenfield and blue sky. In my career, we always talked about a blue sky project, but we actually never did one. Like, who's actually worked on a blue sky project? Maybe, one person, okay. This grass can be walked on, and these clouds can form shapes. Like, this actually does exist, and if you want to work on something from scratch, healthcare might be right for you. The other thing I would mention that's kind of related to that is this idea of receptiveness versus pushback. As we started to unpeel the onion and kind of see what we were dealing with, I was like, oh my God, we're never going to be able to push anything through because look what we have. Somebody tried, I know. And what I have found is the complete opposite. I feel like the amount of receptiveness to the crafts that we've brought to the table, particularly within our organization, have been refreshing and inspiring.
And just to layer on top of that, I have a PhD from Rice. Every job I've ever had, I've been told some variation of, except for NASA, some variation of, hey, we hired you because of your PhD, but we don't actually want you to tell people you have a PhD or act like you have a PhD. But except at Express Scripts, because because it is an industry based in healthcare, and healthcare is science, there is this idea that, oh, you can apply scientific thinking to user experience, and that was sort of, that opened doors to receptivity, and it helped me build advocates and get more buy-in to what we're trying to do. It's not just magic, I'm not just making it up. There are principles behind this. I mean, like I said, I've done this a million times, and that's always been an argument. Express Scripts is a 2-minute conversation, and it just changes everything. What I've seen, too, is that we're able to do all this really quickly, and we can only do that because of the receptiveness. So I don't think we mentioned it, but Christina and I have only been here for 1.5 years. And we've done so much work and made so much change. And it's all because of the people have just been really willing to collaborate and really open.
Yeah. So that kind of plays into the next point, and it's what we call the joy of swinging a sword. And I was always a nerd, but I've made more medieval references working here. I talk about dragons all the time. Like, we're slaying, this is our we have a list of dragons to slay. And
we pull the sword out of the stone all the time.
Yeah, like it's Excalibur, like 24/7. And I also realized that I can kill zombies all day. A designer's purpose in life is to solve problems. And if you are in an environment where problems abound, you either get bogged down by the enormity of what you have to do, or you start slaying. And I like I said, first-person shooter games, you might want to join a healthcare company and feel the metaphorical joy every day. The other thing is that this is real life. There are real lives behind these issues and behind the products that we're delivering. And the type of feedback and the stories that you are exposed to is transformative and sometimes heartbreaking.
Yeah, and to that point, I had to rethink about how I define accomplishment, because as a user researcher, it's always like, okay, how many people can we affect with this change? Like, what can we do? Like, are we moving the needle? Like, how many times did you hear that? But because this is real life, we've pushed through changes that have helped like 5 people. But when that change gives you the feedback, it's like, I'm blind, and this is the first time I've ever been able to buy my own drugs by myself. It's like, that is really powerful, and it's really important to our business, even though it's only a handful of people. And then on the other hand, we make changes like launch Inside RX, and it helps lots of just an innumerable number of people who don't have insurance get access to good pricing. And we run a usability test, and people are like, oh, if this is live, I could have bought my medicine last month. And you're like, whoa, yeah, this is what we're doing. We're not, selling shoes anymore. We are kind of, yeah, we are doing it.
Yeah, and Danielle and I talk a lot about this idea of the redefinition of accomplishment, because for me, this company and this experience has changed my life. It has, in my mind, made me a better person. And I'm, obviously still a work in progress, but this notion of accomplishment, working in financial services for so long, I feel like I lost a little bit of my humanity, and now I got it back.
Yeah.
And that is fulfilling to me personally, and I feel like even though there are a lot of bodies and some of them aren't buried, this is how I experience joy, and I'm proud of it.
Yeah, and one thing though is that it is a double-edged sword. Like I used to jokingly put in my out of office before I worked here for usability emergencies, text me. So everybody would realize there's no such thing as a usability emergency and not to text me when I'm out of office. But here, that's not true. Like, because we have so many fingers in so many pots, there are usability emergencies that I do need to get on the phone on January 1st and figure out what's going on. We can break the website, and that is bad. So that, like, having that responsibility is real, and it is something that is different from other places.
Yep. So I think we're kind of at the end of our material, but the one final thing that we wanted to just put out there, this experience for me, as I mentioned, has been transformative personally, and I believe that it is contributing to a common good. But I also feel like there is an opportunity for all of us to rally around this as a group of professionals that want to solve a problem on the whole. And I kind of think about this in the same way that I thought about this Code for America project. We need a Design for Change, a Code for Healthcare program that we're rallying around, and that we're recruiting people who we know and people who are in our disciplines to look at this issue on a whole and commit to fixing it. So I personally challenge anyone who is interested at all in entering this space to think about that. And if that is something that interests you from a purpose perspective, come talk to us and think about doing it, because it does make a difference.
Slaying dragons and killing zombies.
Okay, so this thing is not working right now, but we were just gonna kind of throw it back to you. What do you think you can bring to healthcare?
The original slogan, do no harm, let your food be your medicine, let your medicine be your food. That seems to be completely lost in these recent decades of invasive, pharmaceutically fixed healthcare. This has really been a big problem.
Yeah, and I mean, just to talk about that a little bit, it's something that we personally think about on a daily basis, because we, like I mentioned, we're in between you and your medicine, and by making it easier to understand and easier for you to give us feedback if something's not working, we hope to achieve that, hope to get to do no harm, because because it wasn't designed, as someone mentioned before, all this bureaucracy just kind of got in the way. And now we need to take a step back and kind of unpack that and try to design it so we can not do harm at a minimum, and then take it to that next level.
You know, simple things work. You know, you get too complicated.
Yeah.
I mean, there are so many problems to solve. I do think the idea of advocacy is one that is largely missing in some of these industries. And the other thing I think is a charge, and something that we should be looking at is notions of wellness and what that actually means. How do we discuss that with people, and what kind of information do we deliver to help people be more healthy holistically, not just fulfilling a transaction or completing a transaction? How do we actually have a discussion that's based in advocacy?
I'm one of the researchers that works for Danielle, and I totally agree with you. And so one of the really interesting pieces of research we did just anecdotally, we were trying to look at different imagery, and one of the most powerful images was of fruits and vegetables on a table. It was vibrant, it was beautiful, and it really spoke to people. It made them feel healthy. And next to that, we had content about them, improving their health, making healthy lifestyle choices. They loved that image, but we couldn't drive them to actually click on the links to do the positive health changes that we had. When we were looking at these different images, there was this question: do our consumers, are they going to be confused because we give prescriptions? Are we now saying that they need to have these holistic solutions? And I remember Christina said, we absolutely want them to have holistic, healthy solutions. Like, that's exactly the message we're trying to convey. But now we're trying to use technology and eye tracking and really figure out how to drive people to see this content that we offer. It's not visible because they're not finding it, or we're not. So it's an ongoing problem we're trying to solve.
I mean, I think a lot of what you're all kind of revealing is the level of there's so many broken connections. And one of the first steps is to actually make the connection point, and then to make sure that that connection is good and it's satisfying and helpful. And it definitely is an incredibly complicated problem, which is why we're talking about it, right? Yeah. It's why it's the last holdout. But we do now have the tools to make improvements, even if it's just step by step. And one of the things that we talk about in our group is this notion of moving a mountain by moving the rocks and the boulders, right? You can't just push a mountain out of the way, but piece by piece, that mountain will move.
I'd like to hear a little bit about how you guys are dealing with user experience in the context of, the users don't know who you are. They've probably been routed to you from, at best, an insurance company's website, right? So you're Aetna sending people to you, and United is sending people to you, et cetera, right? You have no idea what you do, why you're doing it. They think you're Aetna because you're part of my insurance plan. And there needs to be this consistency of experience from, I'm trying to figure out what's going on with my benefits, why my drug is not being covered, how I'm supposed to get it, et cetera. And you're just a part of this process, right? Here in the end, where they need to get their drugs. How are you keeping yourself from just being, I'm only worried about my little world, as opposed to the myriad of ways that people got to you and go back?
Yeah.
So I'm excited.
Okay. You go first, and then I'll layer.
So we've taken a kind of a layered approach. So first thing we had to do was fix our shit. Like, when you got to us, regardless if you knew us or not, there were things that were hard to do and broken. Sure. So we had to fix that first. Now what we're doing is we have a really strong relationship with our clients. So we've started having more and more dialogues with them about what their goals are, what their experience is like, so we can at least be aware of that as they traverse through our experience. That we're just starting to scratch the surface of that, but that's one of the disciplines we are bringing up this year on my team is this idea of end-to-end journey mapping. Yep. So it does not start with us, it does not end with us. What are the pieces around us that we need to be aware of so we can design and design that experience.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I would layer on top of that is like kind of backing up a little bit. It's this acknowledgement of the holistic end-to-end. And that is something that we are responsible for. You know, it's not just a point in time, it's the entire experience, and making sure that everyone that we know and everyone that works on our team understands that that is our job, to make sure there are quality touch points all along the way. And that doesn't seem like it's revolutionary, but you would be surprised. You'd be surprised how many folks like are just looking at the one thing that they are supposed to be doing. Like, seems like you've been there. Start laughing.
And not to pick on financial services, but when I worked there, it was literally my job was these 5 screens. Like I was responsible for usability testing these 5 screens. What came before and what came after was outside of my scope. And that is not the culture that we're building. The other thing I was going to mention is that we are at kind of a neutral, well, in a lot of cases, at a neutral point when it comes to brand. So, like, we don't get the advantage of a halo. Like, we're not this loved brand that people just walk into and we get a lot of, we're able to get away with stuff because of it. And in most cases, we're not this hated brand either. We're this brand that no one's heard of. So we kind of have this fresh start. So we do have to do some education. A lot of the patterns that we're talking about are more kind of step through in situations where you might not have thought we needed to, but we do because they don't have this background of our brand.
Yeah, and that when I was speaking earlier about the patterns for comprehension, a lot of what we're looking at is this notion of progressive education. So understanding, you know, where a lot of folks are coming in and levels of insight, experience, and education, and how we can broadly communicate in a way that makes sense and doesn't lose the audience before you even get the conversation started. So we're looking very specifically at how we can be effective at that, because what you mentioned is something that, you know, is a glaring issue. And it's one that plagues not only our company, but many healthcare companies that are looked at as just a piece of the whole model, right? Like a piece of the machine.
We're all struggling with
Yeah.
where
And
we fit in the flow.
Yeah.
Another important thing that we're doing, because we're part of CTO, so we are in these conversations, is building out our API set. So passing data, like some things we don't need to be involved in. You can just take care of, you know, on this other website. So we are working on modernizing that experience too, knowing where our place is.
Yeah, and I think that challenges the idea of aggregation as a model. You know, I personally don't think that is a model that works well. I think it just brings a lot of confusing things together. But some of these other ways that we're looking at delivering the right information at the right time to customers, to me, is more going outside of those boundaries. So looking beyond what we've experienced today and thinking creatively at multiple ways that we can deliver these experiences and having them be meaningful for the audience.
I even encountered an additional problem, which sometimes we hold the user responsible for their knowledge, right? And so I deal with a lot of expert users, and the idea is that, well, they're experts, they should be able to use it, they should be doing this and that, right? So what can you say about, you know, ways to overcome that particular issue?
The idea of the expert in healthcare, I think, for me, has manifested in a couple of different ways. And you tell me if this is the conversation that you want to have. The first one is that you can't challenge them, right? That there's somebody out there who knows better than you, and you shouldn't question what they're telling you, right? So this idea that the conversation stops because you're talking to someone who knows more than you. I mean, that inherently is disrespectful. And I think it shuts down any kind of open dialogue. And what we're trying to do is to essentially open that dialogue to where there's active conversation. And anytime there's inquiry, that it's asked and answered, right? In a way that is meaningful, personal, and productive. The other thing, though, that comes to mind is this notion that you are essentially, the idea of communicating as an expert loses the audience when you can't speak in language that makes sense. And oftentimes, what you see in healthcare documentation is it reads formulaic or medical, and it's not necessarily something that any person, much less what would an average person, can understand. So essentially, that puts a block in place for success, right? You can't physically complete what you need to do because you simply can't understand it. So those are the two things that I feel like we're actively working on.
And one of the things that we haven't quite gotten to is different user groups. So we don't look at our kind of end user consumers, who we call members. We don't look at them as experts. We kind of expect them to kind of stumble around, and we want to help them. But we do. There is this idea that our clients are experts, or our physicians that interface with us are experts. They should know how to fill out the fax form. I don't know. And so unpacking that idea, kind of the things that we put in place regarding design thinking and some of the disciplines that we have brought up have now started to open up those conversations about, hey, maybe we should be thinking about our clients this way. It's like, yeah, they're humans too. So yeah, we should think about them this way. And we're just now starting to have those conversations.
How do you work with people like that? Because I've spent so much time in interview trying to change mindset.
Yeah.
It's been very, very difficult.
Yeah.
I'll talk.
Okay, you go first.
So I started my first healthcare exposure was in academia, and I actually was on this medical error task force. And if you can imagine someone stepping in from the outside into a hospital telling you that I'm gonna fix all the errors in your hospital, some of the things that people said to me were not nice. And the same thing with flight docs at NASA. Like, you think an astronaut has a big ego, like a flight doctor is another different expert. And it was, that was one of the discouraging things about being in that environment, is that we had a real hard time getting past that. I contrast that with Express Scripts in that we have executive buy-in. So because we're in technology, we have someone who sits at that level with the CEO who kind of is our advocate. And so it comes from the top down, and there's this culture that's receptive. And I never really thought about it that way from an academic perspective, like how can we build that advocacy? I just thought like, oh, we have the data, we can do it. And that just didn't work very well.
Yeah, and what I would say is experimentation and proof. So, what Danielle mentioned makes a big difference when you have exec buy-in and you're supported. But I feel like, if you can't get to the point where you can prove your hypothesis, run the test anyway. Like, don't ask them if you can run the test, just run the test. And have your hypothesis and the proof points that you can present and experiment the hell out of your ideas until you get the right secret sauce. And I mean, we always are kind of asking for forgiveness versus permission, but I feel like that is the way you disarm the expert, is you have proof that something works. And essentially, you don't have the argument. You can't have the argument.
Yeah. And that proof is related to something that they care about. So I know in healthcare it should just be health or safety, but sometimes the person that is your key stakeholder, they really care more about operational efficiency or something like that. So having that tie-in really has helped break down barriers too.
Do you guys think that patient experiences and other types of interactions are transforming in the same direction or a different direction than what you all are doing?
That's a good question.
I think it depends.
So in a lot of cases, yes, because that's how we ended up here. So there was something called Pill Pack a couple years ago. I think they're still around, but they came out a few years ago, and this idea of simplicity and the ability to do things yourself on the web and on a mobile phone was kind of a new concept, and that's more and more healthcare is moving that way. So in that case, yes, but in other cases, it's a little bit different. Like, there's not this idea of self-service and to a deep extent, in our part of the industry.
Yeah, and I do feel like it comes down to how strong is that hand over fist principle, and is there a catalyst for change that could be sparked from future facing, like projections or someone's idea, or executives that are really wanting to innovate or do something new and simply do the right thing. I mean, I feel like it really depends. It vastly, widely, crazily depends.
Yeah, and we are in this unique situation where, even though you've never heard of Express Scripts, we've probably heard of you. And, we have two major competitors. And so when one of us does something, the other two are kind of close behind. And so that lumps a good part of the United States into, this one kind of direction. But the startups and, disruptors are coming, so we want to keep our eyes out for that.
So what happens if Amazon gets into prescription?
I mean, look, I believe in healthy competition.
Yeah.
I feel like there is nothing that makes you do better than competition.
Yeah.
I mean, bring it on.
Competence is delivery, right?
Yeah.
And so how are you pivoting, or how are you innovating the experience for delivery?
So one of the things that that's why we were here. Luckily, a couple of years before Amazon started talking about it, is that we wanted to make it an Amazon-like experience. We would say that sometimes. It's and then we got over that and we're like, we'd be better than them. But to kind of, I don't know if any of you guys have used Express Scripts or had used them in the past, but I remember when I signed up and they mailed me a form with boxes on it to fill out in 2014, and I thought I was crazy. I was like, what is this? So kind of just modernizing the experience and getting to a point, it's we feel like we are at a level that, we're ready for the competition. A few years ago, it would have been a different conversation.
Yep, I agree. Okay, well, thank y'all so much, and thank you for the good conversation.